My story begins with my mother, who had me at the young age of 20. My biological father never wanted children, and when my mother found out she was pregnant, he walked away without looking back. Out of pride or bitterness, she never pursued child support, choosing instead to raise me on her own with the unwavering help of my grandparents. They became my second parents, guiding my mother through her early years of adulthood while also making sure I was cared for, despite our small family unit. I had a happy childhood. My mother finished her education with my grandparents' help and secured a stable job as a web engineer. Life was simple, but I never felt like I was lacking. I adored my mother, believing that she was my greatest protector. Then, when I was 8, she met Harry. Harry was a co-worker, someone she had grown close to over time. They started dating, and while I didn't dislike him, I never felt completely comfortable around him either. He wasn't unkind, but he was distant. After 3 years of dating, they got married. I hoped that with time we would grow closer, but that never happened. Still, I adjusted, thinking that as long as my mother was happy, I could tolerate anything. For 4 years, life continued as usual. But then, my mother became pregnant, and that's when everything changed. When my mother gave birth to twins, everyone was overjoyed, including me. I thought it was a blessing. Our family was growing, and I would have siblings to share my life with. I imagined late-night talks, laughter, and a bond that could never be broken. But I was naive. As time passed, I noticed my mother and Harry becoming more distant. I was no longer the center of my mother's world, and I understood that babies required a lot of attention. What I didn't understand was why they started treating me like I was in the way. At first, it was small things: forgotten goodnight kisses, canceled movie nights, unanswered questions at the dinner table. Then it escalated. They began excluding me from family outings, making plans without informing me, and treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. By the time I turned 16, things took a cruel turn. One evening, my mother and Harry sat me down for a serious conversation. They told me they could no longer afford to keep me in the house. They said the twins were expensive, and it was only fair to prioritize them since they were younger. I stared at them in disbelief. We were financially stable. My mother and Harry were both web engineers earning decent salaries. We lived comfortably. Their excuse was a lie, and we all knew it. I can get a job, I offered desperately. I can help. I don't mind contributing. My mother sighed, her expression unreadable. It's not about that. We need to save money for the twins. They deserve a future. And that was it. That was the moment I realized I was no longer a part of their plans. I packed my things that night and moved in with my grandparents. They were heartbroken, unable to comprehend how their daughter could do this to her own child. Though they didn't cut off contact with my mother, things between them were never the same again. At 16, I worked part-time while finishing high school. I became independent out of necessity, learning the value of every dollar and every hour of hard work. My mother and Harry rarely checked in on me. When they did, their messages were cold and impersonal, as if I were a distant relative instead of their child. By the time I applied to college, I reached out to my mother one last time, hoping she would support me in some way. She refused. "We need to save for the twins' future," she said simply. I was crushed, but I refused to let her decision destroy my dreams. My uncle, seeing my determination, co-signed a student loan for me, giving me the chance to build my future. I worked throughout college, balancing multiple jobs just to survive. I endured sleepless nights, overwhelming stress, and countless sacrifices. But in the end, I made it. When I graduated, I didn't even receive a congratulatory message from my mother. Years passed, and I worked my way up in my career. By 33, I had reached a senior management position at the company where I started. I had built a life for myself, one of stability, hard work, and perseverance. I never asked my mother for anything again. Then, one day, she and Harry showed up. At my doorstep, I was shocked. I hadn't spoken to them in years, but I had heard through my uncle that they had been struggling financially. Apparently, they had found out about my promotion and decided that now would be a good time to reconnect. "We need help," my mother said without pretense. "The twins need tuition money. We thought maybe you could contribute since you're doing so well." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "After everything they had the audacity to ask me for money? No," I said firmly. "I owe you nothing." My mother's face twisted in disbelief. "How can you say that? We raised you. You wouldn't be where you are without us." "You kicked me out at 16, I reminded her. "You refused to help me when I needed you the most. I got here on my own." She tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was selfish and ungrateful. But I stood my ground. The conversation turned ugly, and eventually I had to threaten to call the police to get them to leave. As they walked away, my mother hurled insults at me, calling me heartless, but I felt nothing. After that, my mother started sending me emails filled with emotional manipulation, claiming she had always loved me. When I blocked her, she created new accounts to harass me. She even showed up at my workplace demanding to see me. I wasn't there that day, but it was a wake-up call. I consulted a lawyer about getting a restraining order. A few days later, she crossed the final line. She showed up at my home. When I told her to leave, she lashed out physically. I defended myself, and my neighbors called the police. I pressed charges. She now faces legal consequences, and I am moving forward without her in my life. I have learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and support. My grandparents, uncle, and the people who truly cared for me were my real family. My mother made her choices, and now she must live with them. I am ready to embrace my future, free, strong, and unburdened by the past. Thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.